Studies Section 8, Freedom. Introduction. In social and political philosophy, however, you construe freedom as the absence of any constraint, which is either imposed by the state or by other individuals or citizens in the society. In other words, it may either be physical or social constraints. In this study section, you will learn about the concept of freedom, analysis of freedom by Isaiah Berlin, negative freedom, and positive freedom. Learning outcomes for study section 8. After you have studied this study section, you should be able to explain the term concept of freedom, discuss the analysis of freedom by Isaiah Berlin, define G.C. McCollum, negative freedom and positive freedom. Concept of freedom. There are various ways of looking at the concept of freedom. In a purely philosophical way, freedom means that one is not determined. In this sense, you are using it in a metaphysical way, and what it means is that you have free will. In economic terms, what it means is that in the market, you have free access to actualize our preferences and needs. In other words, you are free to choose. In social and political philosophy, however, you construe freedom as the absence of any constraint which is either imposed by the state or by other individuals or citizens in the society. In other words, it may either be physical or social constraints. In Dutch terms, freedom is regarded as the market where you have free access to actualize our preferences and needs. A. Social. B. Philosophy. C. Metaphysical. D. Social and political philosophy. D. Social and political philosophy. However, what you have just said is simply the most basic formulation of what freedom is in the social and political realm. Freedom or liberty, like other concepts in social and political philosophy, is an essentially contested concept, and the definition of it by any social theorist will depend on its ideological persuasion. But if you want to give a sort of logical structure of the concept, you say Y is free to do X in order to be free from Z. In other words, freedom in this sense means that there are no constraints one is free from those constraints. In an analysis of this sort, freedom to is not complete without freedom from. If you have freedom to education, e.g., you are free from ignorance. In other words, the two basic logical structures of freedom are equivalent to each other. Definition of freedom by social theorists. Most social theorists, however, view freedom in the self-regarding sense, that is, you have freedom insofar as you do not have any constraint that is imposed on us either by the state or by individuals in the state. In this sense, one is free to the extent that there are no limitations to what you can do. This form of freedom is that you have a right, and this right is to a large extent not limited insofar as it does not conflict with the rights of others. J.S. Mill, in his book entitled On Liberty, says that freedom and liberty should be regarded in such a way that one's liberty stops at where another person's liberty starts. He formulated what he calls harm principle. You have liberty insofar as it does not do any harm to others, and this liberty does not give us any license to engage in any acts that is detrimental to the society. However, Mill's conception of liberty is self-regarding. In other words, he conceives liberty in a negative way. Negative liberty is basically conceived or viewed as a form of liberty that is individualistic oriented. You are free insofar as no constraint whatever is imposed on us. In this sense, You have a right to exercise certain basic freedoms, e.g. free speech, free association, etc., insofar as this sense of freedom does not infringe upon the freedom of others. In this conception of freedom, you do not conceive that other limitations could, whether physical, prevent us from exercising our freedom. However, some theorists have argued that negative freedom is simply a formal one. You may be free, but you may not be able to exercise that freedom, since there could be some material constraints that are not imposed directly on us, either by the state or other individuals, but there could be also certain constraints brought about by certain societal arrangements. For instance, you can be free to buy certain things in the market, but due to material limitations, you might not be able to exercise that freedom. Because of this, some theorists have posited what is called positive freedom. Before coming to grips with the notion of positive freedom, Isaiah Berlin took concepts of liberty. Let us look at an analysis of freedom by Isaiah Berlin, who is one of the most influential theorists of freedom. In his seminal work, Two Concepts of Liberty, Berlin claims the idea of negative liberty presupposes an absence of constraints, as earlier remarked. In this conception, one is free from certain restraints or constraints which could externally imposed or internally, as the case may be. The idea of positive freedom, on the other hand, means being free to do something. Berlin goes on to define negative liberty or freedom as an area within which a man can act unobstructed by others. In other words, freedom in this sense consists of a space of unimpeded actions. In defining negative freedom, so much as the obstacles which obstruct or impede freedom, laws or social circumstances, one needs to add that Berlin has been criticized on his view about the distinction he makes between negative freedom and positive freedom, that is, as free from something and as free to do something. G.C. McCollum, Negative and Positive Freedom. In his paper, C. G.C. McCollum maintains that the difference between free to and free from is just a confusion of language, since each case of the freedoms can be described in both ways. Being free to gain education entails being free from ignorance. McCollum goes further to propose a value-free concept of freedom. X is free from Y to do or be Z. In clarifying the notion of freedom in this way, McCollum helps us to think about freedom in a number of ways. In the first place, it suggests that the apparently deep question, "Are you free?" is meaningless unless it is clearly specified in what you are free from and what you are free to do. You may be free from one obstacle like physical assault, but you are not free from others, such as laws which specify that you cannot assault other fellow citizens. Dash maintains that the difference between free to and free from is just a confusion of language, since each case of the freedoms can be described in both ways. A. Richard. B. Rawls. C. McCollum. D. Isaiah Berlin. C. McCollum. Similarly, you can be free from the same obstacle. Why? In this instance, the law to do one thing, smoke tobacco, but you are not free from another like smoking cocaine. Finally, it helps to clarify how people disagree about freedom. In most common cases, the disagreement turns over what should count as an obstacle to freedom. In other words, what can count as why. For instance, while some would take physical or legal obstacles as restricting freedom, others would take lack of material resources or social deprivation as the cause of unfreedom. Let us turn to positive freedom. In Berlin's analysis, is concerned with or refers to autonomy or self-mastery. It is concerned with the question what or who is the source of control or interference that can determine someone to do or be this rather than that. In this case, it is related to the idea of what obstacles are placed on the individuals which make the realization of his or her freedom impossible. In most cases, the obstacles are imposed through the social arrangement which can be removed. In effect, positive freedom stands for effective power, self-realization, self-mastery, or autonomy, or moral or inner freedom. This freedom consists not merely in being left but in having the effect power to act, shifting attention towards the opportunities available to each human individual. Positive freedom in this way is essentially conceived as the ability to do certain things that enhance one's freedom. In this sense, it is regarded. What is basically essential about positive freedom is that there should be certain material facilities provided by the state for people to exercise their negative freedom meaningfully. In other words, this conception of freedom is more concerned with the distribution of material or economic resources. The argument is that you can have formal freedom without necessarily having the means to actualize the freedom. Thus, it is canvassed by certain social theories that negative freedom should also be supplemented by positive freedom. Most of the theorists who embrace positive freedom are of radical persuasion. However, some theorists of conservative inclination have considered it as the antithesis of negative freedom, in that if redistribution of material or economic resources is carried out, this will infringe upon the freedom of others. Although this point is true, it could be argued that on moral grounds, there is the need to help the needy in any society to enjoy their freedom, and this could only be done by distributing materials or economic resources to cater for their needs in order for them to have freedom that is meaningful and will help them to have self-realization. The notion of freedom is not a license for unrestrained freedom. Discuss this in relationship to negative freedom. Summary for study section 8. In this study section 8, you have learned that 1. In social and political philosophy, however, you construe freedom as the absence of any constraint which is either imposed by the state or by other individuals or citizens in the society. In other words, it may either be physical or social constraints. 2. Berlin goes on to define negative liberty or freedom as an area within which a man can act unobstructed by others. In other words, freedom in this sense consists of a space of unimpeded actions. In defining negative freedom, so much as the obstacles which obstruct or impede freedom, laws or social circumstances, one needs to add that Berlin has been criticized on his view about the distinction he makes between negative freedom and positive freedom, that is, as free from something and as free to do something. 3. McCollum goes further to propose a value-free concept of freedom. X is free from Y to do or be Z. In clarifying the notion of freedom in this way, McCollum helps us to think about freedom in a number of ways. 4. In the first place, it suggests that the apparently deep question, are you free, is meaningless unless it is clearly specified in what you are free from and what you are free to do. You may be free from one obstacle like physical assault, but you are not free from others, such as laws which specify that you cannot assault other fellow citizens. 5. The concept of freedom is explored in this chapter. The notion involved in its original conception means not to be restrained by anybody or the state in the pursuance of one's plan or desire. This notion is that of negative freedom. There is also the idea of positive freedom, which is examined. The conclusion is that both negative and positive freedoms are relevant for the realization of freedom. This is the end of study section 8. Thanks for listening.